A renewed focus on safety after a terror attack killed 14 on New Orleans' most popular street, and a KXAN investigation. This week on Inside the Investigations, Matt Grant explains the groundswell of support for safety bollards across the country. Welcome back to Inside the Investigation. And Matt, thank you for joining us. I know you've got a busy day today, so we appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So, okay, Matt, we're talking about bollards again, by the way, because Matt is our expert. But at the start of the year, the news broke that a man drove a pickup truck into a crowd of people on Bourbon Street, killing 14, injuring dozens of others. I know you guys at home have been watching this horrific story as we continue to get more reporting about it. But here at our station and in the Investigates office, we quickly realized that there was a safety issue on that street that paralleled a lot of the reporting that you specifically have been doing for, it's been more than a year, I think, at this point.
Almost a year.
So tell us, because I remember being on the phone with you and saying, Matt, I think they didn't have their bollards up and you've been doing so much reporting on it. Talk us through what you were thinking as you were learning about the bollard situation or lack of on Bourbon Street.
Well, yeah, Kelly, you were here working that day, so you were experiencing on a local level the impact firsthand and covering it on the ground here. When I first heard about what happened, obviously, like the rest of the country, it was just shocking and horrific. What you're looking at now is what started our coverage almost a year ago next month. This was, and the video is just so awful to watch. It's still hard to see it. That was February 13th of last year at St. David's North Austin Medical Center. A driver who was drunk drove into the emergency room, the lobby. She was killed. 5 others were injured. And our reporting found that there were no bollards. That's what we're talking about. That's the security barrier. It's called a bollard. You usually see them at a lot of places outside of buildings, around gas station pumps. And we started raising questions like why these bollards, this security device was not at the hospital. And we went out to College Station. We saw them being tested firsthand. We can see how, when they're used, they can be effective at stopping a speeding vehicle. And since our questions to St. David's, they did install bollards there, but we broadened it out and we started looking at other hospitals too to see, how many in Central Texas have them, how many don't. And then that broadened out to other businesses, storefronts. There was an incident in Cedar Park at a dental office. And then obviously after the tragedy in New Orleans, the horrific attack there, our coverage has broadened out to public spaces. So this has really been a growing investigation on our end that's broadened out over time, right? It started with hospitals in St. David's, and now we're talking about 6th Street, public squares, because of what happened on Bourbon Street. So yeah, this is just, it's become a national conversation, the topic of security, especially when it comes to places where pedestrians are very vulnerable.
And the evidence was always kind of there. Now that you keep pulling it back, it's like, wow, how did we not put all this together sooner?
Well, yeah, and sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but to bounce off of that, right? Like when you hear about some of these incidents, especially with hospitals, I was really surprised about how common they are. When we started digging into this, I wasn't expecting to find that many, right? It seems very unusual, but the more we started digging into it, we found to this date more than 400 incidents of vehicles crashing into medical centers across the country since 2014. And so in isolation, when you hear about these cases, right, you go, wow, this is unbelievable.
Yeah.
But when you start connecting the dots, and we've created a database of all of these crashes that we're using for our investigations, it's a very surprising problem that is surprisingly very common.
And we hear from your expert that you've really used and talked to and gotten their insight in this next story that we're going to show. Is the story that aired on New Year's Day, after we were starting to connect these dots. Matt on the phone with me trying to educate me on questions we needed to ask. So let's watch that now.
Barriers that could have prevented a Ford pickup truck from plowing into a crowd on Bourbon Street were missing at the time of the attack. Just in the last month, the city of New Orleans began replacing its wedge-shaped walls meant to block traffic. On this New Year's Eve, when Bourbon Street draws some of its largest crowds, city officials say they used police cars instead.
In this particular case, terrorists went all the way around up onto the sidewalk.
Rob Ryder with the Storefront Safety Council says police cars as safety barriers are not effective.
A determined attacker can push the vehicle out of the way using, a low-speed crash.
A recent study from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency identified at least 51 vehicle attacks in the United States between 2000 and 2022. Including some where the vehicles held improvised explosive devices.
I've never seen those steel and force barricades put up in 7 years. They've never been up. If those were put in place to prevent accidents like this since 2017, why weren't they back in use?
In Texas, a state lawmaker filed a bill that would require crash-rated safety bollards outside most of the state's hospitals. It comes after a KXAN investigation into a deadly crash into an Austin emergency room. The reporting also resulting in the Austin City Council passing an ordinance requiring bollards outside new medical facilities.
Are you convinced that this will save lives?
Absolutely, this will save lives.
Councilmember Zoe Kadri told KXAN he would also like to see safety bollards in downtown Austin, citing a 2014 incident where a man drove into a crowd at South by Southwest, killing 4 people. In a statement, Kadri said the tragedy in New Orleans underscores the need for the city to remain dedicated to safe streets and public spaces. He also said city officials are looking into putting bollards on Congress Avenue. Back in New Orleans, Governor Jeff Landry is vowing to fix gaps in safety around the French Quarter.
All right, look. We could go on what ifs forever. This is evil. Where there are defects in this system, we are going to be transparent and we are going to address them with the city and make sure that we fill those gaps as best we can.
Matt, what strikes me as so interesting is that Austin was already so ahead of, I think, even in their responses that day, in their reaction, because of the questions you were already asking and because of the reporting that you had already done. There's already, before that horrific attack happened, there was already change happening locally. Break down the myriad of moving balls that are going on as a result of the reporting.
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened in New Orleans kind of crystallizes the national conversation that's taking place about, it's not just bollards, but about security in public spaces and how safe people feel, and especially when it comes to critical infrastructure like hospitals, which is something that we've been asking questions on now, for almost a year. So since we started our investigation, there have been some changes and momentum when it comes to better fortifying critical infrastructure. In Austin right now, what you're seeing is this kind of debate and discussion over what to do with 6th Street, right? That's like the closest parallel that we would have to a Bourbon Street here in Austin. It's main entertainment district. And so right now they're opening it up to vehicles because of the fights and stuff that's been happening downtown. Police say absent like security bollards, that is the safest thing to do right now. But APD has said that they've secured funding for these. They're not bollards per se, but they're like security barriers by a company called Meridian. They're called Meridian barricades, and essentially they would function the same way in stopping a vehicle. And so we're trying to find out, they said that they've secured funding for that. So we're trying to find out how many they would get, where they would go. Austin police did say that it wouldn't just be for the downtown area, but they would look to use them for festivals, for different events, APD, Austin Energy, different public services locations. So there's definitely an ongoing conversation that's evolving about security and the need to increase security at different locations. So that's something that we're continuing to look into. other than that, since last year, Councilmember Kadri, who was in your story, he's looked into and has expressed interest in bollards for downtown. In Austin, just last month, the city council passed an ordinance that was sparked by our investigation that will now require crash-tested security bollards at all new hospitals, urgent care clinics, and standalone emergency rooms. So anything that's new that's built will be required to have that security feature. Existing hospitals will be required to install them if they apply for a new permit in the future. So for example, like if they want to expand, then they would have to install them. So that's what Austin did on a local level, and other cities, College Station among them, are looking at what Austin did as a potential model that they can duplicate. And this was all taking place before what happened in New Orleans. So you have to imagine that the conversation might expand. In Austin, there was some debate before that December 12th vote to pass the ordinance requiring bollards. There was some discussion about, should we pause on this and hold off because it doesn't go far enough, right? This is limited to hospitals and medical facilities, which the St. David's crash sparked the whole conversation. But there was some discussion about, and it started with the Planning Commission, should this expand even further, right? Why just limit it to hospitals? And so I think that's a conversation you're going to see going forward with the city council, certainly on a local level here in Austin, but potentially, across the state and elsewhere. How far should we go? How much money should be spent on protecting these locations? On a state level, Senator Royce West introduced Senate Bill 660. That was also sparked by our investigations. And what it does is it takes what Austin did and it expands it. So what Senator West wants to do through his bill is require crash-rated security bollards or other type of security barrier at hospital ER